So, warmly welcome to this webinar on privacy by design in practice, shaping the future of consumer protection. My name is Gina Moen, and I work at SIS as a project manager. And just to remind you, this webinar is recorded and will be shared after the presentation. You will get an email notification on that. I will briefly go through the agenda for this webinar. We will start by an introduction to the subject by Jan Lindqvist, who is the convener of the Swedish Mirroring Committee of this work. And then we will have the keynote by Jan Schallenbach, who is chairing the ISO committee in consumer protection in the field of privacy by design. And I will, after that, mention a little bit of how you can engage in this area. And we will take questions and answer in the end. And if you have any questions during the presentation, you are welcome to put them in the chat. And we will, if they are very urgent, it might be that the presenters will answer them right away. Otherwise, we will take it in the end. This area or this seminar is hosted by the Swedish Mirroring Committee called CK 318, which is mirroring the both the European and the global work on cybersecurity, information security, and privacy protection. And we have different working groups in the Swedish work, and the one who is chairing this meeting today is Jan Lindqvist, who is responsible for the Swedish work within the data protection, privacy, and identity management area. So by that, I hand over to you, Jan.
There we go. Just unmute. Good afternoon. Yes, I'm Jan Lindqvist. I'm chair for this group AG51 and working with both ISO and CEN standards. And it came to my table, the SC44, and we thought this would have been a very interesting area for us to have a webinar and maybe eventually even have a face-to-face meeting depending on the Swedish industry. What I try as a chair to get more companies to engage with standardization. We think it's a very important area to represent Sweden internationally. And just very shortly about myself, I work with privacy and security, implementation of 27001, 22301, and also GDPR. I'm also lead editor for a couple of standards. One is in ISO Working Group 5 with regards to the consent information structure. And I also work with TK448, which is another group working with the digital wallet. So I'm lead editor for another access control. That's a whole different subject, not for this webinar. With that, I'm going to hand over to Jan to basically do a presentation. I might ask a couple of questions here and there. Do feel free to make comments on the chat, and I'll try to pick them up, and then I might bring them up, or I'll leave it for the end. What I'd like also to do is once Jan finishes the presentation is that we'll do a poll, because we'd like to also hear from what you've heard, and hopefully it's giving you some inspiration as to, oh, these are things that we'd like to think about. And I'll do a poll. You'll be able to scan with the QR code, and then we can get your input, and then we'll open for discussion. With that, I hand over to Jan. Welcome. Glad you could represent SC44 as the chair. And yeah. You're muted, by the way.
Well, hello, thank you. From Jan in Sweden to Jan in Berlin. Hi, hi everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here at SIS, although only virtually today, hopefully maybe in person in somewhat a near future. I'm looking forward to take you through a 25-minute ride through the current field of privacy and consumer protection standardization, especially in ISO. You've already seen some of the structures, and we'll come back to that. But let me first start with some kind of broader perspective, just very briefly, which is a person I like to link into this context, which is Larry Lessig. Some of you may know he used to be at Harvard Law School, did a lot of important work in our field of digital regulation. And he kind of set the idea that there's four forces that shape our modern society in the digital age. That's, of course, the law. He's a lawyer. I'm a lawyer, so must be the law. Of course, there's markets, but there's also the cultural norms, which is what communities expect, and there's technologies. And I believe that the work that we're doing is kind of at this meeting point of these different forces, giving them a space international to interact, to communicate with each other, and to figure out good solutions. And some of that, and most of that has been done within ISO in different subcommittees of JTC1, which is what Jin alluded to earlier. That's the complicated structure of ISO. There's IEC, which is a similar organization, but more for the electro-engineering field. And since there is overlap in these two fields, there's a joint technical committee where these kind of larger groups come together. And then they have a set of subcommittees. One that is important in our field is SC27, which originally dealt with IT security, now goes into cybersecurity and privacy protection as well. And there's numerous other committees. SC42, for example, is concerned with artificial intelligence, which I hear recently has been of rising importance. And the newest kid on the block is SC44, which is consumer protection and privacy by design, which we'll focus on today. But before we go into SC44, let me give you a bit of an overview of what's already out there. And a lot of that work has been conducted, as mentioned, in SC27, specifically in Working Group 5. There's other working groups, for example, in Working Group 1 of SC27, the ISO IEC 27000 series is written. So that might be something people can already relate to. In Working Group 5, we have some complementing standards to the 27000 series. For example, the 27701, throwing more numbers at you, which is developing a privacy information management system similar to an ISMS. But there is lots more stuff out there. Some of this can be seen on this slide. Just want to highlight two of them. The one that's up there is the general framework. That's the privacy framework, which really sets terminology and principles. And when we started working in Working Group 5, some nearly 20 years ago now, this was kind of the first thing we developed. And it took quite a while because in standardization processes, the first step is to kind of internationally or globally develop a common ground on what principles you're trying to achieve. So that's what happened here. And then from there followed a huge area of different standards that came up. One, for example, is the one highlighted down there in the line of implementation, which is privacy notices and consent, which is supported by consent record information structure, the 27560. Our colleague Jan is the dear expert for this document. And there's loads of other stuff that's already out there. You can look at it like a tree. These kind of standards often form bottom up. Whenever there's volunteers coming about saying there's something specific we want to standardize, then it will meet some scrutiny in the group, and we'll have to find experts from other countries. And then a new project is developed, and eventually an international standard is published. So now, why would we need SC44 when we already have all these wonderful standards in SC27? And what's the specific take of SC44? Well, SC44 is consumer oriented. It's the first committee that is putting that in its title, and that's a new thing for ISO. And it's a little bit alien. It's something that ISO also knows that it needs to get used to, but it's not easy because it's been more driven by a perspective of an organization, which is fine, which is important, which we should not forget. But this now brings on a stronger consumer focus. So when you look at that, it's just clear we are different persona in different contexts. We're social beings, we're citizens, and then we're also consumers, and you could divide that more in depth. But essentially, it's talking about this part. We're not talking about our relationship to governments. We're not talking so much about our relationship between other peers, but in our relationship to enterprises. What's the point in privacy by design here? Why is that the second emphasis of the forum? And that's an interesting one. First of all, it's a concept that's been developed and in the making for at least 20 years, and I'll show you some of that. But I want to also relate it to a different term that may be more familiar to you, which is data protection by design, which is actually mandated in the GDPR. And how does that relate to privacy by design? Well, you can see it as this. If you look at privacy by design, it would protect, traditionally, if we consider an old school concept of privacy, you would think about the privacy of your homes, right? But that's not what we mean internationally by privacy by design. I think we never really defined privacy in this context, and I think there seems to be an emerging agreement that we're not only protecting the security and privacy of our homes when we're talking about privacy, but we're essentially doing the same thing the GDPR tries to do, which is protecting all kinds of human rights. It's equality, it's human dignity, it's our liberty, or even the possibility to participate in the culture, in the arts, to talk freely, to think freely. All these are aspects that we're trying to protect. So essentially, it's really about protecting the rights that humans have in a digital environment. And that's kind of what, sure, yeah. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, you're maybe going to finish your sentence, but I just thought there was a comment, and I thought it could be interesting to see it's a lot of consumer focus. How about the business-to-business aspect of data protection? So there's you trust another business that I'm working with data protection against another business. Are we having the same interpretations between the two? Have you considered that? Or we can take it at the end if you prefer.
Not sure I grasp the gist of the question right now, but it may have been acoustics. So you're saying what's in it for the business? Is that what you're saying?
Business to business relation. So
in a business to business.
Examples you give were focused on from a consumer, the rights inherit.
So if I were to boil it down into one sentence, is what SC44 exposes is that when you approach standardization in SC44, you would look at it from the consumer lens. So you would look at it in what would be consumer needs, and that might boil down into standards that relate to business, because it is well understood that consumer products usually act in relationship to a whole ecosystem of different businesses that interact with each other. And the business that actually does the consumer transaction in the end relies on certain services provided by other business. And only if those services reliably offer to fulfill certain compliance requirements, you can signal to the consumer what you want to signal. And in a lot of cases, currently we're facing lemon markets, so markets where the consumer does not want to buy or does not want to buy into certain things because he doesn't know how to compare different situations, where they don't trust that this service actually gives you better privacy assurances that the others may be. it's at least it's not stable, is what I would like to expose. There's a number of different use cases where that has been well proven, but that's something that might be interesting to discuss.
I'll
weigh in, yeah, sure.
Sorry,
You go.
it's a very. I hope you don't mind the interaction. It's just
No, absolutely, I love it.
I part the question of the relation between businesses. I understand the looking at from a consumer perspective and how do you compare, and we can maybe take it up at the end if you prefer. Also, the code of conduct aspect for business. If they fulfill certain code of conduct, there's a way of comparing the businesses. But is this something you want to answer now or take it at the end?
How about we come back to that later? Indeed.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of mechanisms that you could look into from a business to business perspective, but I want to set the stage completely first, I guess, so we can put that in context. So let me give you, if I may, give you some just a couple of notes on the concept of privacy by design, where it came from and how we came about with SC44, and maybe that'll answer some of your questions. So in principle, the approach that Anne Cavoukian from Ontario, Canada, and John Borking, back then the Data Protection Commissioner of the Netherlands, developed in a paper was let's try to look at privacy or data protection from a different perspective, not make it that everybody is annoyed and bored and just sees it as something that you put on afterwards, but it's stressing you out when developing a product. So the idea was to turn that around and try and be proactive and more see this also as an enabler and how to actually do that. And that was by developing and thinking privacy or data protection right into the design process. So when you start even contemplating a product, you use certain mechanisms and methods to find a solution that is privacy friendly. And that will then hopefully also increase your business proposition. I guess SC44 is then the structure, how we try and put that into established business practices. And I have to warn you, ISO structures always take a little bit until they establish themselves. So here's how SC44 started. It was actually in 2017, which is 9 years ago by now, where the consumer group within ISO said we need to work on this and established first a project committee, PC 317. And project committee only has to develop one standard, which it did. That was published in 2023, which is the 317.00 Part 1. I'll come to that in a second. And a Part 2, which is a technical report that accompanies that document a little bit. At the same time, PC 317 had initially said, well, we can't deal with all of this with one single standard. All we can do there is maybe develop a couple of high-level requirements, but there needs to be more work. So when the work of the project committee was finished by delivering the project, the committee itself said, let's make that into a permanent committee, which took another 2 years to get established through the different structures. And last year in April, we finally had the first meeting of this new committee. And now we're at some 30 P members, which are active members and a couple of observers. Plus a number of liaison relationships, something that we might also want to weigh in a little bit later on how that works. The structure of SC44 is very lean right now because it's still early days. We're just one working group right now. We have a comms group. A lot of work takes place in the ad hoc group and in the chair advisory group. To dive into that is in working group 1, we're looking at some of the already established standards like the high-level requirements, but we're also approaching new work. But a lot of work currently is located in the chair advisory group and in the ad hoc group because we're still establishing our structures and our methodology. And that's actually where I'd be very interested in also hearing from the audience what they think could be good ways to move ahead. But before we dive into that discussion, maybe I can give you some more clue about what's already out there. So in the in the high-level requirements document that the original project committee came up with, there is a focus on developing high-level requirements. So we're not going to be very prescriptive, but only the high-level stuff. And that is sorted into 5 areas. That's some general requirements. Then there is some on communication, some on risk management, some more in the area of deployment, and then there is one considering the end of the life cycle. And just to give you an idea, I'll give you a quick glimpse of what's actually in the 31700 Part 1. That's the published standard that you could work with today and soon you could audit against. But you will see that this indeed is really high level, although this is, of course, just an abbreviation of the standard. Each of these 27-something requirements, of course, has some more in-depth information about what is meant. But you can kind of get the gist on what level of requirements we're talking about. It's fairly generic, and some of these things you will easily be able to prove by just using other standards who fit into these high-level requirements. On the general side, it is that you have to consider all these different aspects of consumer rights. On the side of the communication, there is a little bit more in depth, but it's also still very agnostic, no matter which types of use cases you approach, which types of applications you approach. It's going to be very high level. And similar for the risk management, these requirements are in one way easy to fulfill, in the other not, because they're not giving you very specific instructions. I think the most interesting part is when it comes to the deployment parts, where it really helps you right from developing the product. Keep in mind that at one point in time, you have to consider aspects like managing a privacy breach, or how do you actually design your privacy control testing, etc. And of course, it reminds you that that at the end of a product, there might be still data floating around. So this is just a glimpse of those 27 high-level requirements that's already there. So comparing that to what I discussed earlier for Working Group 5, where we had the framework and principles standards, that's already there. I think we have agreement on the principles that we're aiming for. And to make that more tangible, there's also this part 2, which has a couple of example use cases and kind of puts that into context for specific situations. But bear in mind, this part 2 is a technical report, so it does not provide specific requirements. It just tells you how in different use cases it might impact you if you're looking at it from the perspective of these privacy by design requirements. And now forthcoming is a third part that's currently under development, which is why this is called NP in the middle of the screen, new project. And this is similar to what you will find for ISMS, a guiding document if you want to audit and tell people you're compliant with the high-level requirements. The interesting part is, I guess, when we're talking about what is up next. So as I said, SC44 is still in its infancy. We're currently looking into gathering more use cases, trying to figure out what could be good new projects, and discussing our general strategy. And I think what has been the core outcome of the discussion until now is that it might be helpful if we look at a more modular approach, which means that, again, we have to rely on bottom-up development. So volunteers coming about and saying, here's something I want to address. And essentially, the inclination of the group is we would be very open for anybody who says, okay, I have a very specific use case. Maybe it's a specific mobile service that you're developing. And in this service, we're especially looking at, for example, a specific consumer communication requirement. or we're looking at specific groups with limitations. We're looking at services for kids. So it might be that you have an idea for something that is very relevant, where you can provide very concrete instructions on how to deal with preserving human rights or individual rights or consumer rights in a specific context by addressing one or more of these high-level requirements in a specific context. And that would, in my view, be a very good example of a future standard that could work in our group, and could also help you in finding a forum to discuss what could be the common ground that all services in this area should meet, or even what could be a differentiator towards certain other services in a quote-unquote lemon market. So essentially, I want to close with a invitation to all of you to both some more discussion, but also to dive into the process of developing further standards in that field. So we build systems that people want to use. And given, Jan, that you already move forwards into more vivid discussion, which I appreciate very much, I cut it short on this part, and let's go dive into business to business, and whatever questions you might have, the more interactive, the better.
Yeah, we could maybe, I want to do a poll very shortly, and then we can continue with further Q&A. The business to business aspect, and this is a reflection in both the Working Group 20 and this SE 44, how you interpret between businesses of how you implement these standards. You want a low bar for new companies developing a service, and then you want to be able to make an accountability. So if one business interpret, oh, this is a good privacy by design, another business can also claim that, but are they interpreting, getting those standards? How do you see SE 44 setting that bar so that one business interprets one way and another? And we could maybe show the list of, you had some examples on slide 37. If I'm an online retailer and I want to do privacy by design and you come with the standards, how would that one business compare to another one? Yeah, because you have that code of conduct, In the US, you have the AAA ratings. There are different ways of assessing, but it'd be very interesting to see if, is this something, we will talk about some of the challenges, the participants through this poll, but I thought maybe just putting your spin on SE 44 helping with this.
So there's a couple of different things you touched upon. One of that is market threshold and business maturity, and then of course the interbusiness communication and the interbusiness interpretation of certain rules. So for example, if you're having a business that wants to market a product, but you rely on other services to deliver on that product. That could be a very typical situation. We could pick any of these use cases. You have a fitness center and you have a service that that provides you with RFID tags and the whole infrastructure to measure entry and exit, etc. And you want to rely on that infrastructure, and you want to ensure that certain promises you give to your companies, to your customers, are also kept by your suppliers. So then a standard might help you if the supplier has used an auditing scheme and met certain requirements. And that could be the SC 44 high-level requirements. And the interesting part in that is that it is probably, although very high level, the most comprehensive approach, because it really starts at the beginning of your business process, of your product development life cycle. and it hints you to what you have to consider right in the beginning. And then a number of all these other standards out there, you remember this big tree, will be referenced and will help you in actually making that work. But as a business, you will then figure out, for example, oh, right, we have a very good standard for recording our notices and our consent from our customers. But there is a different area that's very specific to my business area that's never been looked into. And if I just apply the high-level requirement and rely on my supplier to fulfill that high-level requirement, I still don't know what that means. So this is where you want to envision or develop a very specific modular standard, right? My prime example is always could be very simple as developing a standard that says, well, if I push the off button on my mobile phone, what does that actually mean? What's the guarantees you're giving when you push that off button? For me, it's currently not clear. It certainly is still on when I turn it off, because the Find Me function still works on this specific phone. And that's a good thing. I want the Find Me function, but I also want to know what it specifically does. And maybe there's another product in the market that says, okay, my market advantage is that I have an off button that is really off. But what does that mean? And that could be defined in the standard. So we could write a simple standard that defines different types or one type of off button for mobile devices and clearly depicts what that implies and what that doesn't imply. And similarly, you could look into modular standards in all kinds of other areas.
Yeah. I really like that approach with the modular aspect. If I implement a specific feature off, what do you interpret? Is it fully off or not off? So for different consumer areas, I presume you're leaning towards creating these modular small standards that might be applicable for mobiles, might be on health devices, services. So they'll be very modular. And then it's very clear what is the interpretation of how data is being shared in these specific moments.
I think that's the idea that's in the current outline of how we want to go about. We've not started any specific project. We're currently evaluating different use cases where to start first, and I'm looking for more examples and good starter projects. But yeah, I think that would solve a number of problems. The modularity would especially solve the problem that usually it takes forever and a day to develop a full-blown standard. And usually a lot of these standards are trying to boil the ocean. So it might be very good if we try and figure out a way to really look into very, very specific situations. But it also solves another problem. If you have high-level requirements, it's very hard to actually gauge or judge whether you're compliant or not. Do you have to have a risk assessment in place? Yes, of course I have a risk assessment in place. But it might be that you can make that much more concrete in a very specific situation. And then you actually know what you're talking about when you're saying you're complying with the standard. Where right now there might be a lot of ambiguity.
I'd like to, on that note of the pains, I'd like if you could bring up the slide 21, because I want to do the poll now. I want to hear people's pains. And slide 21, you mentioned a report that was written, and it'd be great maybe if we shared it with the participants. And
the 7 principles,
right?
Yeah,
right. And I see these as potentially the pains, the challenges that business or from a consumer one is having trouble with, or from a business perspective. With this, I'm going to go into the poll. So I don't know if you wanted to add anything to this before, because I'm trying to stimulate now for the audience to think about what are my pains surrounding, and you'll get the question, what is the biggest gap between the privacy principles and reality? So see, here are some of the examples of principles. You might have others. So with this, I'm going to share the screen. Hopefully I have permissions. And there will be a QR code for you to scan, and then 1 to 3 words. What do you feel is that for your, both either as a consumer or as a business or regulation, what are you seeing the biggest gap? So here's the QR code. You can scan it with your phone. Very easy. Just Jan, if you want to also participate, you can scan that as well. Then you have an opportunity to, and it should be interactive as well. And I'll give it a minute for you to add your thoughts. So you're welcome to participate and giving your input. I mean, this will help us establish, okay, these are the pains and what opportunities we may have here in SC 44 to address them.
All right, I'm right on it, already putting in something like that question. Let's see what we'll get here. I did a similar exercise just recently at CPDP, where we held a workshop getting people to actually write down certain areas where they think work was needed. It was a really interesting exercise, figuring, and we're looking forward to allow for more occasions, because one of the issues is also how do you get different stakeholders involved actively, and we're all consumers, of course, in the market. So every expert brings the consumer perspective into the space somewhat, but making this strong is a challenge.
I see AI not quite as big as a practice, but it's catching up a little bit, and many different smaller areas. But I don't want to influence too much the polling. If we take another minute here, then we can close the polling. If you see something you feel like it's brings to heart, you can also add, highlight anything you felt like, oh, that makes sense. I would like also to highlight that.
Well, I mean, clearly practice is the thing, and that's not a surprise, right? And that I think is exactly where the work is now going, is trying to put these high-level requirements in practice. And I mean, if I expose this this very brief overview of the standard, of course, there's much more in there. There's also lots of references already to existing standards. There's a lot more guidance in the document, but it will never have the practical depth that you will achieve if you're talking about very much more specific and concrete scenarios, which is where I think is the advantage. And now figuring out where are the insecurities of consumers, and that's, I think, where the lots of the other words that are in this cloud come into play, is what we need to figure out. Where is the consumer really not happy with the situation? And I see, for example, compliance a couple of times, right? So it might be that one difficulty is that consumers see the promises of the actors in the market, but they lack trust, it says here, or mechanisms to believe that the AI is not using their interaction to further train the system, or that it's not per used, right? And there's different strategies towards that. If we're looking at AI, it might be the focus on local systems, similar to what some actors in the market do. It might be totally other mechanisms. For example, trusted execution environments are increasingly gaining traction. And you could also look into mechanisms where you have give third parties a stronger role. I think that's going to be very interesting in the AI space because there are certain limits that we can foresee for local models. We don't know yet exactly, but there will still be a room for centralized models, and that will have certain impacts.
With that, thanks for everybody giving your comments. We have two that are winners here. One is in the practice and one in the AI. And I'll make an interpretation. If it's right, then thumbs up, or me or Jan, and then we know it's the practice, as Jan you've described. It's this modularity of describing how we practice. How do we privacy by design? Is it the same interpretation, just like your example with the off button? But there might be a number of different scenarios that we need to cover. That would be one in relation to practice. AI, with the latest reports of what I've read of Anthropic and how AI can not only scan for all the vulnerabilities in your solutions and what's out there, it can create a big threat. And they can also create zero-day threats, meaning you get a threat that hasn't been out there. And from a consumer or even a business, being able to work with the systems that are so advanced that they're identifying the risks to a business. That transparency of that information, it's something if we could touch briefly. That was one question I had thought of coming into this webinar is how do you see from an AI perspective and the transparency of how it uses your personal data? Yes, there's a threat. The businesses need to consider and think about their supply chain to protect themselves against zero-day attacks. That might be in the social engineering, but then from a consumer or business to business, and how the AI might need to be lifted up as a risk in a business, or it might help you identify those risks and threats. Do you have any reflections on AI in relation to SC44?
So not surprisingly, AI was considered, even before SC44 was put in place, was considered one of the areas where we would need and see more work. Although I'm pretty sure that just saying, okay, let's build a consumer and privacy by design standard for AI would again be too broad. So we would have to look into very or more specific situations. One use case you mentioned for AI is identification of 0 days or exploits in general. And that might or might not be a use case where there is strong indication of need for privacy by design standardization. I think there's others where it's much clearer, but we're still in the early days of developing the use cases. A couple of them have already been well established. I mean, if we're talking AI in the current sense of the meaning, so everybody is talking about, I guess, GPTs, or maybe not stable diffusion models. Modern neural networks, not the broadness of everything AI. And in these areas, there might be a number of cases that we can identify where it would immediately help both consumers but also businesses to find a better and clearer market situation. Currently, there's a lot of services out there that offer large language model interaction, chat interaction for free, but then users' data might also be per used. And that might be clear to some users, to some it might not, although the services often do provide these little signs and indicate that, so there is a sense of transparency. But you could come up with a transparency standard that makes that more clear, or that you could say this is the standard that all agree on, and the consumer then will be better informed in that specific use situation. Might even improve the market situation for some of the providers, because users will realize that that's not what they want, so they'll go for the upsell and buy into the pro accounts that promise not to reuse the data. Not sure whether that's going to be delivering on the trust issues that consumers might have. For that, you might need a different approach. But for this certain part, it might be helpful to dive into that. And I think it's also a question of fairness towards the consumer, that that services who offer such a service abide to certain rules even in communicating what they're doing with the data.
Thank you, Jan. What we'll do is if you have specific comments or questions you like to bring up, do type them in the chat, and then we'll bring them up. We are going to get a presentation from Jin about the participation in standards. And because the group is so new, this gives a great opportunity to participate in standards. This is the point where you have the most influence. It's at the very beginning. Once it starts establishing, it becomes very difficult to change. But at the same time, you might have very specific standardization work you would like to get in, like this modularity. If you work with specific products and you would like to, I think Sweden is in the forefront of being proactive and being transparent and innovative. Maybe you want to create a module specifically for your product, or a consumer group, or a business where you want to see the standard addressing a specific privacy by design. Show your inner practices from a standards perspective. Then everybody is talking the same language when they say, oh, I've done privacy by design for my locks. Well, did we interpret the same way? And then you have a modularity, as Jan mentioned, and then you're comparing apples with apples, not different aspects, especially from the privacy perspective.
Yeah, you're absolutely on track. I totally agree. I also understand that it might be a little bit of an interesting exercise, but also challenging at this day to figure out what could be a good proposal, and would the thing that I have in mind, would that actually fit into the picture? All I can do is currently to encourage you to think along that lines and bring it to the table, and we can discuss it. And the starting point often is, and that's how we work currently, is just setting up and describing the use case, and where you think certain requirements in these use cases are especially important. I also saw a question touching on the relationship of privacy and information security. In the broad sense, you're right in one way. Often it's proving compliance to information security. Privacy does bring a couple of additional requirements into the game. The most obvious is that it looks at things more from the individual perspective. That's one part, but it also sometimes goes beyond simple information security. It's much more geared also towards organizational mechanisms, towards things like transparency, but also includes conceptualizing your system. And you could argue that's information security. Conceptualize your system in such a way that certain, say, app uses of data or certain interactions that might harm the consumer are not possible based on the way you architect your system. And again, I said, you could also argue that's somewhat multilateral security. So it might be the same. Usually we consider it as a Venn diagram of overlapping circles.
One thing I think, if I can expand on this this question, which I see the challenge is from information security. You're being audited. You demonstrate a certification. Do you see this modularity being part of the audit, where you certify, yes, an auditor checking 27001, 27701 to demonstrate that these modules have been fulfilled. So there is a clear demonstration of evidence. Would you see that as also being part of the modules?
Absolutely. That's the idea, basically, I guess. So, as I said, a lot of these high-level requirements that I just mentioned can, to some extent, already be addressed with existing standards. So it's not that we're trying, or this group will try and reinvent the wheel. Actually, most of the work we conducted during last year was assessing all of the other potentially relevant standards in ISO as to their relationship and whether they are really within our scope or only tangentially, is that a word? So I guess a lot of the work in SC44 will be looking into relating these different standards into a more complete picture that will then help you during your development of the product and guide you through the process. And whereas usually you would only start later on in the process and say, okay, we have a product developed. Okay, we need to get our ISMS in place now, right? The approach taken in SC44 will guide you to that. Keep in mind that later on you will have to have your information security management system in place. Think about it while you're developing the product. What is the implications while you're developing the product? This is kind of the twist in thinking, but it's not really a lot of additional stuff. I think it's just going to ideally it's going to make your life easier because it guides you through the sets of standards that are out there and closes the areas where there is significant gaps in the communication towards users.
There's an excellent comment about it's very powerful to communicate if you can demonstrate the compliance. So if you create these modules, it's very clear what is expected. Just like consumer products, are they ecological or not? You're setting the bar. This is what's interpreted. This is how you develop, and that is, could be very, very useful. In a minute here, we're gonna Jen is gonna give some last words from the CIS side. I saw one last question here before we go over to her. What would you say is the biggest difference between ISO 31700 and Euro privacy? Have you looked into that?
Yeah, I think I was involved with the predecessor of Euro privacy a long time ago. So this is Euro privacy is a mechanism in accordance to Article 42 GDPR, I believe. So it's a certification mechanism, and it certifies that the system can be used in a GDPR compliant way. The approach SC44 takes is a step earlier, is how to fulfill the requirement of Article, I think it's 25, data protection by design. How do you actually do that? And I'm not sure whether Euro privacy already has a strong requirement set to prove that this has been done, but usually they would probably look at something like what SC44 has produced and will in the future continue to look at some things like that.
Okay, thank you for the explanation.
Sure.
With this, I will ask Jin if you want to do the final wrap up, and then we might pick a question or straddler at the end, but yes.
Yep, perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so if you are interested in following this work or contributing to this work, we would love to be the facilitator for you to join this work. And SIS, which is one of the 3 Swedish standardization organizations, is a non-profit organization that has the task to facilitate the standardization work. And we work in committees, as SC44 is a committee on a global level. We also have the committees on the Swedish level, which are focused on different kind of topics. And since in Sweden we are mostly mirroring the European and the international work, we don't have so many Swedish standards within this area, since it's quite global issues we are talking about. But being part of the Swedish committee, you can also join the European and the global work, and there take part in the work, and also have the possibility to propose the new working items, and be part of drafting the different projects. As I said, we have the Swedish and the European and the global level. And just to remind you of this schedule or organization diagram, you can see that the Swedish committee mirrors a lot of different working groups within Sensen, like on the European level, but also on the ISO level, which is the global level. And being part on the Swedish committee, you will get access to all of these if you want to, or you can also just choose the area of which you are most interested in. And if you want to have more, or if you have more questions or want some more information, feel free to contact me or explore the website for the technical committee. One occasion to actually interact with us live is the CRA, Cyber Resilience Act Day, which we will arrange on the May 4th in Kista. There you can meet a lot of participants in the committee, and also learn more about CRA. So that was my short summary of how to engage. So
I love how you mirror both SC27 Working Group 5 and SC44 in one mirror committee, because these are so connected. I advise a lot of national bodies to do the same, but some are having difficulties. You don't, which is good. I think that's a good combination.
Yep.
About this picture, just so the audience understands, maybe you're not involved in standards at all. Do not feel intimidated. As soon as you have focused on one specific standard, work with that one. Everything is as noise. And this is something that I think is most challenging with getting into standards, if you haven't been, is just focus, just very specific ones, without being distracted with everything else that might be happening. And there is a mentorship as well, Jin, that we can mention, that if you feel like, I feel intimidated, this structure, all these committees, it's not. It's probably one of the most, what do you call it, politically correct ways of working. People are so consensus driven and respectful that I admire the standards, and I wish companies would work in some ways as far as getting a consensus and really trying hard to let's listen to everybody and then trying to draw to a conclusion. And I know this from being as a lead editor, trying to get input, and also Jan from his chairmanship is getting consensus. And just that art is worth getting into standards to see how standards is developed based on consensus from experts across the industry. And you learn a lot from it. And there is this opportunity for mentorship. So I don't know, Jan, do you want to say some last words before we end?
I love how you concluded in coming back to my initial slide where I said this is where law, norms, markets, technology meets, where we try and find rapport, essentially, an agreement. And I'm obviously very glad to hear that you like the environment that is created there. And I think that's important. Bear in mind, we don't have other many other global infrastructures where this can actually take place. This is not something regulated globally, but we have global infrastructures like the internet. So ISO is one of the places where you can make that happen to some extent, at least based on standards, which of course are not enforceable, which is also a good thing, I guess.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for having me, and thank you all for listening. Hopefully, it was a bit of an encouragement to all of you to get involved or gave you a better understanding of what we've been doing. Thank you very much.
I mean, I also thank you, and as well, I'm proud of being punctual. We said 1 hour. We're precisely at that 1 hour. We may stay for a few more minutes if you wanted to ask more direct questions, have a conversation. We'll be available for 10 more minutes, but the webinar is done now. So thank you.
I'll be happy to stick around. Great.
Yeah, just in case somebody wants to ask a direct question, but thank you for participating. I hope, Jen, we can organize several of these going forward as well.
Yes,
Good.
And we will also distribute the slides and the recordings when it's ready. So thank you for joining today.
Thank you. I think it was a very good presentation, Jan. It was a good trying to get, I mean, it's in the form